Hello, welcome to the Bible study. My name is Kent Philpott. I'm the pastor of Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley, California, in my 36th year, coming up to the end of that in about a month and a half. But we're in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 8, and there are two sections we're going to be looking at. First one is titled Comfort for God's People. The second one is The Word of God Stands Forever. Now, where do those titles come from? They're not original to the Bible. When my ESV, English Standard Version that I like to use, I have used a number of different versions over the period of my preaching history: King James, Revised Standard, New International Bible, maybe one or two others, but I like this one the best. It's easy for me. No complicated words, and it's a good translation. But the people that put these together, they give these little sections titles that weren't there in the original. So I want to make that plain to you. This particular passage is a fabulous piece of work. It is has a timeless message, beautiful prose. This prophet Isaiah used a lot of prose poetry. Now, I'm going to give you a little history, and I'm going to give you something a little of a controversy surrounding this, because it is normal for people to divide Isaiah into two sections, sometimes even three. But those who divide it up, and I don't really know where I stand. If you don't mind me saying that, I'm not sure about these things at this point. I know many good Christians are of the same mind that I am, but the part of the first 39 chapters of Isaiah they say it's part of Isaiah 1, and 40 on to 66 is a second part. Now, in the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in 1947 in Qumran cave by some Arab shepherds, I guess they were, but they found this early Dead Sea Scroll community, Jewish people who were out in the desert keeping away from the Roman army. And they hid in jars and buried them, all of these documents. Isaiah was found there, all 66 chapters, some smudged, but it's called the Great Isaiah Scroll. And they're all there, all one book, and had to have been planted there in and around the days of Jesus. So ancient, but there they are. It makes up, this Isaiah scroll makes up 25% of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we can't look at that and say, oh, it's written at two different times, because part of Isaiah, the first 39 chapters, we're looking at 740, 730, and 720 on down. But when we get to chapter 40, then we're all of a sudden, it jumps way ahead, 100 years ahead, to the Babylonian captivity and the coming back, which didn't take place until 538. The captivity started in 586 BCE. So Isaiah didn't live that long, so there's one or two choices you're going to have to make. Either there were two different authors, and probably in the second part, people say, well, the prophets had schools. It's pretty easy to demonstrate they had schools of disciples. And this was Isaiah's people, and they continued the history. Or, well, he's a prophet of God. He can see the future. He can see down that far ahead. For example, Cyrus the king, the Persian king, is spoken of, and he didn't even live for 150 years after the probable death of Isaiah. So you have this little thing, and some people say, well, if you don't believe my way, something's wrong. And I've held both positions, and where I'm at right now is, I don't know. Anyway, I said those things because in case you hear them, you're not necessarily be motivated then to write these people off into the nether regions because they happen to have a differing point of view. I have an essay that I wrote called No Two Alike. No two Christians are going to be believing alike all the way through with all of the doctrines. No. I ascribe to the Apostles' Creed, the essential elements of the Christian faith. And there's a few other confessions that I like as well. In any case, so here we have I'm going to give a little history. In 722 BCE, the Assyrians, sometimes known as the Neo-Assyrians, came down and they captured the northern kingdom, the 10 northern tribes. Ended up, after 3 or 4 places, they established their capital at Samaria. In 586, the Babylonians came down. The Babylonians came down, 586 BCE, and they conquered the southern kingdom. That would be Judah and Benjamin. And they made the people made them captive. In 540, Cyrus the Persians overwhelmed the Babylonians, and 2 years later, in 538, he allowed the Jewish people to return to their homeland. And some 50,000 did, although the majority of the Jewish people that had been taken captive and had been born in Babylon, they stayed there. So that's a little bit of the history of this particular period. So Isaiah 40 then begins with the second part of what we say the Isaiah scroll. Whether he wrote it all personally or only partially, we don't know. And really, it doesn't make a great deal of difference when you think about it. Okay, now let's get down to the sermon. 7 minutes with something as essentially an aside. So Isaiah 41 through 8. So the Babylonian exiles are returning to Israel, 538. And at minimum, this passage shows that the prophecies of Isaiah proved to be spot on. So here's a section called Comfort for God's People. Verse 1, comfort, comfort my people, says your God. In the Hebrew, it was Nahamu, Nahamu. I remember back in the days of Church Open Door, there was a lady who was going to seminary, a fine person, been a flight attendant. Beverly Igo was her name, and she loved, when she was studying Hebrew, Nahamu, Nahamu. That was her favorite passage. Comfort, comfort my people. I pointed out in the last program that the word paraclete we find in John 14, that paraclete can be translated comforter. The idea of the one paraclete, one called alongside, cleat, called, para, alongside, called alongside for what? To give comfort. And here we find this concept. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. He pronounces comfort upon them. And it says, verse 2, speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her warfare is ended. Here's the returning 50,000 from Babylon. They're coming back to rebuild the city. We find a lot of history of that in Ezra and Nehemiah. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Cry to her that her warfare is ended. It's like God instructs the prophet to make this proclamation, that her warfare is ended and her iniquity is pardoned. The reason they were made captive is because they did not obey the things that the prophets of God had told the nation. And they tried other means of escaping the wrath of the Babylonians. And they had, like everybody, had fallen into sinful practices and ways. And it's too lengthy a thing to start to describe it all, but essentially they would take up the heathen practices of the nations around them. And it was really something. very occult oriented, worshiping all kinds of small deities, gods and goddesses, turning to fortune tellers and oracles, waiting to get a word. Sometimes we do that. We hear that today. Everybody has a word for somebody. People get together and try to see if they can get impressed with a word for somebody. I am completely not in favor of that. I think that is very dangerous, and we do not find it a biblical practice. Yes, there is a word of knowledge. I've had words of knowledge long ago, not one for several decades. But it's not something that normally you run around seeking a word to speak to somebody, a download that you get impressed with. Dangerous, approaching the occult. And it's okay to disagree with me, and if you do, start studying it. Take a look. Find out what you think. Her warfare is ended. Her iniquity is pardoned. Her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. In other words, it's doubling of the grace. Doubling of the grace. God has brought them back from exile into their homeland that he had given them. And so these majestic, beautiful words. I've been reading, when I go through this, I read them in Hebrew too. And not that well, let me tell you. I'm no Hebrew scholar, I'm no Greek scholar either. But in reading the Hebrew words, it's quite profound. Verse 3, a voice cries, very poetic, very dramatic. A voice cries, in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. In the wilderness, they're coming back they were in the wilderness, that's Babylon. Up north, this would be in the area of Iraq, modern-day Iraq, and area of Syria. In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. The people are coming back. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. It's just a beautiful way of saying to the pilgrims who are coming back, here you're coming back to the place God has given you. And, you know, it reminds me of many Christians that I have known who have literally spent years in walking away from Jesus. I knew a group of people in the greater Bay Area that I met some years ago who had been converted in the Jesus People movement back in the 70s primarily. And then because of bad leadership, failures on the part of leaders, and just things not turning out like they hoped it would, they literally stopped practicing being Christians in terms of meeting together, reading their Bibles, witnessing to other people. But then, about 10 years ago, after several decades of walking away, they found their way back. It was startling. I know these people. They've been, some of them, on my television program. Startling, wonderful, but it can happen. It can happen to people. And I know that it's happened to people here in Marin County. That for any number of reasons, and a lot of times for very good reasons, people said, I am not going to be a part of a Christian community anymore. It's dangerous. It's like walking through a minefield. I like to say, one of my definitions of a church is, it's a minefield. You can get blown up. I've been blown up more than once. And I wouldn't be a part of it if it were not for it being a part of the normal Christian life. But I have to say, and I'm speaking to people maybe right now, you've had a hard time in a fellowship. You've run into circumstances beyond your control that were very dangerous for you, and you felt that you had no other reason than to just walk away. One of the reasons we like to speak to our church for those without a church at Miller Avenue Church to be a part of anyway, even if you never show up, if you never live in the state, live in the western part of the United States or someplace else in the world, you can still be a part of our church for those without a church. Go to milleravenuechurch.org and you'll see what I mean. milleravenuechurch.org. Look around, noodle around, as my wife likes to say, and see what you can find. And you're welcome to be a part. So the voice says, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Wow, okay. Verse 4. Now, the poetic structure here is very interesting. What's being said. It's not to be taken exactly literal. But listen, verse 4. Every valley shall be lifted up. Instead of going down, up, it's raised to the level. And every mountain and hill be made low. No barriers. No barriers of mountains or valleys. The uneven ground shall become level. That's saying what would happen if the valleys were lifted up and the mountains and hills were made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. So that last part you see is called a parallel or parallel form of poetry, very common with the Hebrew prophets and poets. The prophets were always poets, and so it makes for much more interesting reading. Okay, verse 5. Verse 5. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. Now, what does that mean? And if you're having to preach or teach on passages like this, you're going to say, what does that mean? And you'll reach for the commentaries. Maybe you find one online. What does this mean? And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. Now, the glory of the Lord, that means the presence. Remember, glory has to do with God's presence. Where God is, there is his glory. To be glorified is to be in God's presence. Heaven is really a place of glorification. It means we are in the presence of God. Where God's glory is, God's present. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. Now, what my view of this is that he's looking ahead to the arrival of the Messiah. He's looking forward to the Christ. By the way, Messiah and Christ mean the same thing. It means anointed one. The prophets, the priests, and the kings of Israel were anointed, usually with a scented kind of olive oil, and whoever was in charge, the prophet, for example, like Samuel and so on, would anoint the head of the new prophet. The kings were anointed. This identified you. This was the coronation. This was the inauguration. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed. Okay, the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. The Messiah has come. Looking ahead. Whether this is written in the 8th century or the 6th century, doesn't make any difference. Centuries in advance. Here it is, announces the Messiah is going to come. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed. It's going to be revealed, not attained to. This is very important. Who God is revealed. Is revealed to us. We don't attain to it through anything that we could do or anything that we could learn. God cannot be apprehended except through his personal self-revelation to us. Every religion in the world except Christianity. And that includes Judaism and Islam. Includes those. Only Christianity. God has to reveal himself to us. That's called conversion. Only God does that through the power of the Holy Spirit. and we don't really understand very much about it. So then it says, and all flesh shall see it together. They'll see it. It's going to be plain. It's going to be made manifest. We're talking about the incarnation. Now here's Isaiah. Centuries before the event, centuries. You have everything right here. That's why I like to say, you do not need the Greek Bible, the New Testament, to understand it all. Of course, we love the Bible. We love the scriptures. We love the testaments, both. But see, it's all here. But you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know it was all here if you didn't have the Greek Bible. By reading the Greek Bible and understanding that history, now, all of a sudden, this Hebrew Bible, you start seeing things, wow. Somebody's counted 317 instances in the Hebrew Bible that speak specifically about the Messiah and is fulfilled and seen as fulfilled in Jesus. 317. I know there's a list that's longer than that, but I'm going with a shorter one. That's a lot. And this is from Genesis to Chronicles, or in our English Bible, Malachi. In the Jewish Bible, put out by the Jewish Publication Society or agency, it ends in Chronicles. Okay. All flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Okay. That last little phrase says, this is it. I have told you. That's it. Okay. So in that verse 5, it speaks of both the first coming and the second coming. And the second coming. Because it says, and all flesh shall see it together. And this is why many commentators will say, well, here is a reference not only to the first coming, the virgin birth, the incarnation, the Word become flesh and dwelling among us. Not just then, but the return of Messiah Jesus, where all eyes will be seeing, both dead and alive. Okay, we're into the second section now, which the ESV is titled, The Word of God Stands Forever. And it starts with a very beautiful thing, which I put to music with some guitar chords. I might even be tempted to sing it a little bit, but I don't know. Okay, a voice says cry. In other words, all of a sudden, Isaiah hears this. This is something the prophet is hearing now. A voice says cry. And then he responds, and I said, what shall I cry? He's commanded, to cry. What does that mean? It means to announce or proclaim, to cry out loud. It doesn't mean, doesn't mean that. I should have explained that early on. It doesn't mean that sort of thing. It is a poetic way of saying announce, proclaim. I'm going to tell you something. I want everybody to know it. Okay. A voice says cry. Now one's not just softly, but loudly. A voice says cry, and I said, what shall I cry? And then we have the little segment called All Flesh is Grass. Okay, excuse me. I'm going to try to sing it. All flesh is grass, and its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever, Well, I hope too many people didn't reach for the switch and go to another channel, but I think that's entirely possible. As you get older, things change, and you lose a little bit, but that's okay. Every time I look in the mirror, I think, Philpott, It's not looking good, guy. I overcome that by realizing this is a normal aging process, and I'm not worried about that, but I know that it's difficult for some people. Okay, I just have a few minutes. So it says, all flesh is grass. What does that mean? And all its beauty is like the flower of the field. This is a recognition, the fact that we get old and we die. This is how it is. Things change. Things I used to be able to do, I can't do anymore. I wonder if I'm going to be able to be a baseball coach anymore. People think that Philpott's too old to coach anymore. I don't know. All flesh is grass, all of us. Indeed, its beauty is like the flower of the field. In this heat we're going through right now, a lot of the flowers aren't doing so good. Our beloved petunias are not good looking at all. Verse 7 says, the grass withers, the flower fades. How beautiful the poetry. Our lawn is pretty well gray. I mean, not gray, brown, turning brown. The grass withers, the flower fades when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Now, the breath is an interesting word. It's ruach in Hebrew. It can mean spirit. It can mean wind. It can mean breath. The corresponding Greek word is pneuma, which can be spirit, breath, or wind also. Exactly the same. Ruach. I don't pronounce it right. When the breath of the Lord, when the Spirit blows upon it, we are made like we're made. We aren't going to live forever. The end of verse 7 says, surely the people are grass. One of the most important things to recognize is about ourselves. And during this pandemic, it is a lesson played large. A lesson played large and loud. That surely the people are grass. And we have to have that sense about ourselves to retain our dignity and our balance and our composure as we get older. Knowing this is simply the process that all human beings go through, built in the creation by our Creator God. Verse 8, the grass withers, the flower fades. It repeats. But the word of our God will stand forever. That's where Isaiah is going with this. Isn't that a fantastic thing? This verse 40, the second part of Isaiah, where he was the prophet or where belonged to the school of the prophets, is unknown and really not pertinent, actually. But the word of our God will stand forever. This is a word of hope for all of God's people in times of hardship and despair. The word of our God will stand forever, no matter what happens, no matter what we go through. All right, that's the end of the program. I get to say so long.